Oh, my lights are on. It's okay. Oh, and I did what Christine usually does. Christine, if you're watching me, it's okay. It happens to all of us, right? Hey guys, if you're noticing, if you're watching, you see that it is me by myself, right? Not Christine and I, how it usually is. Christine, we are sending you hugs and love as you are away from the podcast this week. Y'all, today we are talking about environmental wellness, and I'm super excited to have this conversation about how to nourish your dog, yourself, your mind, body, soul, all of it, right? Because we are all intertwined, and it's important to make sure that we are completely taken care of. Sometimes the environment can help, it can make it difficult, depends on the day, depends on what's going on, right? We're going to talk about how to be intentional about it. If you don't know, I am Shannon Mitchell, a Black millennial entrepreneur and Amazon best-selling publisher, author, and all-natural product manufacturer. I'm a champion for your natural self-care, sustainable business care, and overall intentional wellness. Again, today we're going to be talking about environmental wellness, and we're going to jump into it a little bit quicker than we usually do. But I would love for you guys to tell me in the comments, how are you doing on your environmental wellness? What is it that works? What is it that you found doesn't work and you're working on weeding that out of your habits, right? Let's have a conversation about it. I'm going to jump into our definition and our bio so that we can go ahead and bring our guests on and have a full conversation highlighting the work that she does so that you guys can get connected to her resources. So, again, y'all, here at Women Connected in Wisdom, we have our own definitions for these different types of wellness, right? And environmental wellness is supporting your good health by occupying pleasant, stimulating environments that enhance well being. It promotes interaction with nature and also creating enjoyable personal environments, both in and out of your workplace. This includes knowing the types of environments you thrive in and having an intentional relationship with these places, including the earth. Today, our expert is Dr. Alexia Miller. She is a former academic turned dog mama, canine nutrition consultant, Reiki master, and animal communicator who takes a holistic approach to nourishing our dogs, ourself, and the planet, mind, body, and soul. Alexia's doctoral work used her own art practice to investigate how to better engage individuals and communities with the complex problems of climate change. She did this by helping people to become curious about the connection between themselves and nature and to dream up new possible versions of the world we want to create. Ultimately, Alexia discovered that climate change is not just a scientific problem to solve, but rather it is a profound spiritual call to question our values and who we think we are. Now, Alexia has turned her attention to the unique invitation of the human canine bond. She is a firm believer that dogs are healers and are mirrors. As we explore how to best nourish them, we are also invited to take a deep look at how we nourish ourselves and our planet. Alexia is also the host of the Mystic Dog Mama podcast, which was born out of a desire to create a community focused on both the esoteric and practical sides of walking the spiritual path with our dogs. It is the place of inspiring stories, along with practical tips and tricks on how to lead a more holistic, nourished, and soulful life with our canine companion. Help me welcome to the stage Dr. Alexia Mellor.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited for today.
Absolutely. This is going to be a really good conversation.
Hmm hmm
So, can you walk me through how did you go from climate change, caring about the world, right, to human and canine bonds?
Well, that was an interesting path and actually an unexpected path for me,
Okay.
where I had, as an artist, I was using a practice that was called participatory art. And so the focus was less on creating like a painting or a sculpture, but creating an object that would help facilitate conversations. And I was much more interested in the conversations and the relationships and asking different questions and getting people to see different possibilities for themselves.
Yes.
And I ended up translating that into business context and helping businesses through that. But I felt a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever had this, Shannon, but like
Mm.
you think you're going down one path, you kind of think you've got it all mapped out, and then the universe kind of hits you with a 2x4 and is like,
Mm.
I think we kind of need to change directions here.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, happened.
So that definitely happened for me. And I
Mm.
actually, I came to visit some friends and family in Mexico after I'd finished a postdoctoral fellowship project. And I was really like, I don't really know that this is the direction that I want to be going, but I don't know what that is. And
Right.
I had been on the spiritual path for years at that point. So I always
Mm.
had that as the kind of underpinning of all that I was doing. I just didn't necessarily always listen,
Mm.
but I was definitely called to listen at this point. And I came to visit and was just like, feeling like I was going to go on some sort of pilgrimage, to be honest. I had this idea of like taking some time off, doing some traveling, but with this intentional spiritual questioning for myself of who am I now and what am I here to do now?
Yes.
And then the universe kind of threw its own little wrench in the works with the pandemic.
Mm.
And all of these plans kind of stopped and I was trapped.
Mm.
And I ended up right before full lockdown, I was just feeling really like I just need my chakras unblocking or something has to shift in my field.
Yes.
And I went to a local curandero. And for those who are not familiar with what a curandero is in Mexican culture, that's like a traditional folk healer who practices all forms of medicine. They're doing herbalism. They're the ones that you would go to for like chiropractic work. They also do shamanic work, like the whole package of it. So again, this
Okay.
holistic perspective on wellness.
Right.
And I went there and he asked me to remind him why I was there. And I
Mm.
was like, well, I feel like I need, my chakras unblocking. And he just laughed at me, which was very disconcerting, like having
Mm.
the healer laugh at you. And he
Right.
said, you don't need your chakras unblocking. You're a bruja, a
Mm.
witch, or really
Mm.
meaning somebody who works with energy, a healer.
Mm. Mm.
And you need to learn to work with your energy. And he said,
Wow.
I want you to pay attention, particularly right now, to dogs and cats that
Mm.
cross your path because they are healers for you.
Mm.
And literally days later, as full lockdown was announced, we got a
Yeah.
knock on the door asking if we could foster a little puppy.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, universe,
Yeah.
I get it. And
Yeah.
so unexpectedly, I was gifted this whole opportunity that I honestly had no idea what was coming my way. I had no idea what it was going to turn into. I thought I was doing just like a kind gesture of looking after a dog for a little while,
Right.
but it turned into this major, major, major invitation for growth in ways that I wouldn't have expected. And needless to say, it was what we would refer to in the kind of dog adoption communities, a foster
Mm.
fail. I ended
Mm.
up I ended up keeping him, and
Yes.
through a series of his challenges of being what's often referred to as a pandemic pup, where he wasn't exposed to things in the
Mm.
same way you would normally expose a new puppy to, because we couldn't go out, we couldn't engage
Right.
with people. He
Right.
had a lot of behavioral challenges, and then he started with health challenges
Mm.
that I had to research on my own. So I repurposed my PhD, my kind of like,
Mm.
I became instead of a doctor of like philosophy, I became a
Right.
doctor in like figuring out what to do with my little dog who's not doing so well.
Yes.
And as I started on that path, I noticed how much it was bringing up for me around, again, with that kind of mirroring that you alluded to in my bio, that
Yes.
there was this invitation for me to really look at what is going on with me in terms of what am I afraid of, what are my health challenges, etc. And seeing that what ended up happening is that although I thought initially that I was going to be going on a pilgrimage that involved traveling to different places,
Yeah.
what occurred for me was in the book A Course in Miracles, it's often talked about like of a journey that where you're not leaving any kind of place, like
Mm.
it's without a particular kind of travel plan, but really it's an internal journey. And
Mhm.
so that's what happened. It started off with like not expecting to have a dog come into my life whatsoever, but he has
Yeah.
become such a teacher, such a
Mm.
teacher. So that's kind of the start of it.
Yes. And it's always interesting when we get invited to, and I love how you said it, opportunities, right? To learn ourselves better.
Hmm.
Mhm, mhm.
Totally. And they come in such unexpected ways. They
Right,
really do.
right. So can we talk more about that? Can we talk more about the mirroring and how I know we're talking about dogs, right? But can we talk about dogs, cats, and more the bonding between us as what do you call yourself a dog parent? What do you call yourself?
I'm a mystic dog mama. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. I
right,
am
a dog
yeah.
mama. Right, right, right.
I'm a dog
So
mama.
between the dog mamas, right, and the doggies, what do you can you tell us more?
Yeah, well, something that's really interesting for me about the human canine bond in particular is
Yes.
I
Mm,
talked to an archaeologist who
okay.
specifies his research on how dogs and humans co-evolved, and it's very
Mm,
much a notion of co-evolution that
okay.
you can't understand what it means to be human without understanding the dog and vice versa,
Mm,
because as we if you kind of trace back the domestication of dogs, there was a split with wolves, and one of the cousins of the wolf
mhm,
is what ultimately became the dog. But the dog, as we know it, came from us providing food scraps, for example,
mhm,
around our camps, and we hunted with them,
mhm.
and we then bred them specifically based off of what we saw as their natural tendencies and behaviors and their
Right.
skills to
Yes.
provide to work for us, to collaborate with us and do particular jobs. So they changed how we evolved as a species just as
Mhm.
much as we changed how they evolved as a species. And that's unique to dogs. Cats, I would argue, are not quite as domesticated. They still retain they've got a certain level of independence that I don't think we're ever
Yes.
going to breed out of them, which I love about that. But yeah, you can apply these same kinds of concepts to whatever animals that you're connecting with. And I think it's really about recognizing the oneness that we all are, that we are all just different forms of consciousness.
Right.
And again,
Yes.
like anything, it's that idea of the adage of like as above so below, as
Mhm.
within so without. Like
Right.
everything is connected, and there's an opportunity in everything you're seeing and experiencing and doing to reflect that back and ask, what is the wisdom in this situation? What is this thing that I don't like even
Mhm.
offering me in terms of wisdom? What is this bond that I've got offering me as in terms of wisdom? Again, ultimately to understand ourselves.
Absolutely. You saying that reminds me of something that Dr. Sheila K. Collins has in her book. She was recently down, I don't know if you know, she's one of our authors, and she shares on grief, art, dancing, right? And her latest release is The Art of Grieving. And in that, she shares this question that we reference throughout the podcast of what is this loss? What life is this loss calling me to live? And that's what I think
Mm,
about when you say that, right? This
totally.
if this is upsetting, this isn't what I where I expect it to be or what I expected to happen. Okay, what am I supposed to learn here? Who does that
Mm-hmm.
make me? Who am I
Mm-hmm.
now?
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And it reminds me of what we were just saying before we
Yeah,
started recording, too, of how
yeah,
we ultimately are dying every single day. We're dying to ourselves, dying to the past
right.
versions of ourselves. And I
Mhm,
think one of the things we're asked to do is
mhm,
to really hold space for that possible expansion, to grow into places and versions of ourselves that we never even envisioned, that we didn't even know was possible. And again,
right.
that requires curiosity, and it
Mhm,
requires a sense of trust and a sense of presence for what is unfolding. What is it that I'm being shown? What
mhm,
can I learn about this? And then asking, like, what steps can I take forward in this? And I think that's also what our animals and everything else, if you have that same kind of connection with plants, like there's
mhm,
an opportunity to look into anything and everything,
right.
is mirroring back to us those kinds of opportunities. We just have to have, again, I use that term all the time, the lens of curiosity to see
Mhm.
it.
I love that. And curiosity is definitely something that I've been working on operating from.
Mm,
So I ask more questions so that I'm more present and so I'm intentional about the energy that I'm looking at things with. It's really easy to be cynical. even think about it in the way that you always thought about it, and not a
Yeah.
new way or a way that can be applicable to the situation you're in. So this is really important.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. That was something that I learned when I was doing my art practice, and people were asking me like, "What's the difference between art and design?" Because
Mhm.
in many cases, especially the kind of work that I was doing, there were
Yeah.
massive overlaps, and it can actually look like the same thing. But I think
Right.
like fundamentally, one of the things that was different for me was that design was meant to problem solve. You've got a problem, you're trying to create something as a solution for that. Whereas
Mm.
art is all about asking those big open questions without seeking a particular answer. And I think
Mhm.
that's something we're really uncomfortable with because we want the answer, we want a sense of certainty. But for me,
Mhm.
that's what curiosity is really provoking, is like, can I just ask the question without having to answer it and allow things to come into my life that show me potential directions that I can choose from. And it
Yeah.
also shows that there isn't necessarily one answer. There's not necessarily one way to do something. And
Right.
so taking off that pressure that I think so many of us have of needing to do it right, needing to
Mhm.
have it all figured out, that
Right.
what if that doesn't need to exist? What if that's not even true? How
Mhm.
does that give me a sense of freedom that I've not experienced before?
Yes. So what was it like for you learning this, realizing this? Was it unsettling? Was it
Yeah.
freeing? Where were you?
All of it, all of
Yes.
it. I
Makes
think
sense.
we often think on the healing journey, and I would argue that we're always on the healing journey, and that healing
Yes.
is really the reason there's no end in sight is because we're always growing. And there's no end to our growth. It's completely exponential. And
Mhm.
that healing isn't about getting rid of something. I think
Mhm.
we often, particularly in the West, think of like getting rid of the disease, getting rid
Right.
of the kind of habit or what
Yes.
have you. But it's
Right.
actually about integrating it. It's that
Mhm.
bringing it in through love and allowing all of those complex parts of ourselves to exist simultaneously without judgment. And
Yes.
that's really hard for us to do. But I think that my healing journey, especially, I think for me, when I had that instance of like the pandemic was difficult for everyone.
Yes.
But what happened for me during that was I chose, despite, and again, it's not changing what's happening around me, it was changing my internal perspective on it. I
Mm.
chose to see it as an opportunity for, okay, so my industry has collapsed. I'm
Mm.
literally trapped in another place. I
Mhm.
now have a dog that I wasn't expecting. I have no idea how to care for a dog. Like all
Right.
of these external things that weren't on my bucket list, weren't on
Mhm.
my 5-year plan. And all of a
Right.
sudden, right? Like I've got to kind of deal with it.
Yeah.
And looking at that, that's an internal job. But the biggest thing that I found was that I was asked to learn to love myself. And so when you're asking, like, was that an easy journey? No,
Mhm.
no, not at all. But it was the most profound journey. And it's one I continue to be on. I will be on this for the rest of my life. It doesn't, like I
Mhm.
said, it doesn't end. But I
Yes.
think it's important for us to keep in mind that there is no particular end goal to this. Like one day I'll be fixed and I won't have to deal with all this stuff. But it's
Mhm.
it's seeing everything that's coming up, whether you like it or not, as one, not you, right? So
Mhm.
not identifying with that thing, recognizing
Right.
you are the observer of all of
Mhm.
this,
Yes.
and looking at, again, can we ask that question? So what is this teaching me?
Mhm.
There's wisdom in everything. There's wisdom in the thing you wanted to happen not happening. There's wisdom in something that you wanted to go a particular way not going that way. There's wisdom in the
Absolutely.
thing working out exactly how you wanted it to work out, right? So
Mhm.
it's again sort of being like neutral with the thing itself and more
Yes.
curious about what's the wisdom that's behind this that allows me to step into the fuller version of myself.
Absolutely. And I can definitely attest to the separation of self in the situation to observer, and how much more peace it gives me through difficult situations. What do you
Mm-hmm.
think? What do you think about that separation? Is it difficult for your clients to do that? What can make it easier to um, be more, I don't know if better positioned is the way to say
Mm-hmm.
it, but what can help?
Something that I found really helpful for myself, and that in working with people I found helpful too, is watching
Yes.
our language. And I don't mean in that kind of like policing ourselves and then censoring ourselves, because I think that can exist in certain communities where it's like
Mhm.
you feel afraid to even voice anything because of how it's going to come across. And I'm talking about how you're talking to yourself. I think it's also
Yes.
important to remember we have internalized an inner critic that isn't true. And these voices have come from social pressures, from maybe our family of origin, from the things that we have kind of internalized through school, all of that kind of stuff. And so this whole process is asking us to kind of unravel some of that stuff and to recognize, like, is that actually how I think? Is that actually my voice? Or was I told that on some level? But
Right.
a really simple exercise that I think is really helpful is watching how we'll say things like, I'm really sad.
Mm.
And can we change that from I'm really sad to like I'm experiencing sadness?
Mm.
So even a little thing like that, there's a little bit of separation. It's not defining myself as sad, but it's saying
Right.
right now, the experience that I'm having, and it's completely validating that experience, but
Mhm.
recognizing the experience is sadness. I'm not sad. These emotions are coming through me. I'm witnessing them. And I think
Mm.
even little things like that, you start to recognize one, when you become conscious of what you're saying,
Yes.
when you force yourself to be conscious, you realize how many times you're like talking negatively about yourself. For example, you're putting yourself down, you're dismissing your accomplishments or what have
Mhm.
you. You become conscious of that. But then also, even with things like emotions, where that's an easier one, I think, for people to kind of recognize, like where we can make that switch.
Mm.
You start to see, if I can say that I am experiencing sadness, who is the I that's having that experience?
Mhm.
It's not the sadness, right?
Right,
And so
right.
who is the I that is witnessing this?
Mm.
And you don't have to answer that. I think it's just more about posing that question. Like, so taking that artistic perspective on it of like, I'm just going to ask the question and see what unfolds without expectation that I need to know or that it needs to come at a particular time. So I think that's a useful thing, to just to start noticing the language and then intentionally choose different words that
Mm.
allow you to feel a little bit separate from it, not feel
Yes.
so engulfed by it.
That absolutely makes sense. And it reminds me of what we were talking about before for the self-trust, right? Because as you build that muscle, I'm sure the self-trust builds and all the things fall together a little bit easier. Can you talk to that a little bit and how it is included in this conversation that we're having?
Oh, totally. Honestly, this is my personal perspective, and I'd be curious to hear other people's perspectives on this. But one of the reasons that I think that we are here is ultimately to learn who we truly are. And I'm not talking about the kind of ego personality of
Right.
self, but like
Right.
that higher self, that part of you that is connected to everything, that is eternal, the spirit of who we are. And that we come here to have all of these different experiences that give us opportunities, again, in that mirroring,
Right.
getting to see like, this is part of me, or how do I feel about this, and to be curious about that whole thing. So the more that we do that kind of work, the more that we take just that perspective of like, everything is here to show me different aspects of myself.
Mhm.
So who am I? What does this look like? And you do start to trust yourself. And it's a little bit like when I've worked with clients around trusting your intuition.
Mhm.
I think that's a term that's bandied around a lot,
Mm.
and not a lot of explanation of what that really kind of encompasses. Like, how do I even know? What does it even feel like? And I think that's an opportunity as well to kind of get curious, to
Yeah.
see like, do you get, like we were talking beforehand, like, do you get physical hits in your stomach? Like, do you feel like a tightening in your stomach? Do you feel like a warmth, physical warmth in your chest area? Or
Mm.
do you just sort of know something and you don't
Mhm.
know where you know it? Do you hear things, or do you see things? And when you hear things, it might not be in someone else's voice. It could very well be in your own voice.
Right.
But we're all having these experiences all the time, but we dismiss them. We
Mm.
dismiss them as not true, or
Mhm.
we don't think, well, that could possibly be our intuition. And one of the things that I work with people, this is something I did in my art practice. This is something I've done as a coach. This is
Yes.
something I do now in terms of helping people in their relationships with their dogs, is
Mm.
that when you get some sort of hit, this kind of comes down to what I talk about as purpose
Okay.
and intuition kind of going hand in hand, where
Yeah.
purpose is not necessarily about like, go out, have this big mission of like saving the whales. That can
Right.
be part of how you actually act out your purpose. But
Mm.
purpose for me is that little pull that you have towards something. Just like,
Mm.
you can feel your body kind of moving towards it. Like, it can be really subtle, or it can be really strong. And it could be
Mm.
something like, I feel like a cup of coffee. You feel it's like, oh, that's your purpose right then. The purpose is the pull, it's not the thing.
Mm,
And the more that you act on those feelings, the more that you act on the stomach hit that you're getting, the heart hit that you're getting, the voice that you're getting, the more you're demonstrating to yourself
mhm.
that you are willing to trust yourself, that you're trust that higher self, right? That's giving you this kind of information, if you will. And
Mhm.
so it starts with really small things. It starts with acknowledging, I feel like a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is good for me right now. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. You complete that circuit, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
I feel like going and talking to that person over there. And if that feels like a safe and appropriate thing to do, you go
Right.
and you talk to them. And you never know, like, how many times have you had sort of like a synchronistic event, right? Where you just start a chat with somebody and it's like, oh my
Yes.
goodness, I didn't know you complete the mission that you kind of came together for. But again, I think it starts with really small stuff. And as you keep doing that, the more you repeat that, it's building a habit, the
Yes.
more you're demonstrating self-trust. And
Mm,
then that bigger and bigger things start to come in. And
mhm.
because you have a track record of trusting yourself, you trust yourself with those bigger things.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, when I think about trusting myself, it also takes me to my weight loss story, right? We're talking
Mhm.
about nutrition for dogs, but it was 2 or 3 years I was talking about changing my diet. I was kickboxing, not as consistently as I should have, right? But kickboxing for years, the weight wasn't dropping. And then I finally did the Daniel's fast one January and committed to it, stayed consistent, and all this weight started falling off, right? So, can we talk about nutrition and
Mhm.
canine nutrition? I've been seeing a lot of different things about what dogs deserve to eat, what they don't deserve to eat in these commercials and things, right? What's a healthy way to think about canine nutrition?
Oh, I love that question. And it so reflects back on how we think about our own nutrition. And I talk
Right.
about nutrition hand in hand with nourishment,
Mhm.
because I think they're part and parcel. Nutrition kind of refers to the specifics of the foods and the liquids that we're consuming,
Mhm.
but put that in the context of nourishment, which also speaks to what are the environments that we're putting ourselves in, our dogs in, how are
Yes.
we taking care of our emotional self, how are
Mhm.
we taking care of our spiritual self, all of our energetic self. All of that is going to impact, even at a kind of practical level, how the body is even absorbing the nutrients from the food. Like,
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
know that when we and when our dogs are in a highly stressed state, that directly impacts the microbiome. And it is we're there's studies, like hundreds and hundreds of studies coming out every week around the
Wow.
microbiome and how that is related. That is like the heart of where our health lies. And
Mhm.
for those who are not really sure like what the microbiome is, that's all of
Mhm.
the bacteria and their genes and the various fungi, all the microbes that exist on our bodies and in our bodies, but I'm specifically
Yes.
talking about the ones in the gut that
Yes.
help to both prevent us from getting ill. So they kill off the bad bacteria. The good bacteria
Yes.
kills off the bad ones to prevent illness, but
Yes.
also they are responsible for breaking down the food into a way that we can actually absorb the nutrients out of it.
Mm.
So when we don't have a healthy microbiome, we start to see health problems. We see it within ourselves and we see it within our dogs. So that's a really kind of simple, but I think direct place to kind of point to nourishment over nutrition, or rather like having to have that conversation, because it doesn't matter what you're putting in the dog's bowl if you're keeping them in a highly stressed out environment, or you're exposing them to loads and loads of chemicals, or you're not giving them the opportunity to be a dog and to do the things that dogs need to do. Their health is going to suffer as a result of that. But again, that reflects back on us. Where are
Right.
we not allowing ourselves to be in environments that are nourishing us? Where
Yes.
are we like in a constant state of stress that's affecting us? We know that stress creates disease, and
Mhm.
yet we only tend to talk about like the food or the drugs that we're taking or what have you for the health, but it all has to be looked at part and parcel. So that's where I bring nourishment and nutrition together in the conversation. In
Mhm.
terms of what a dog needs to eat,
Yes.
dogs are facultative carnivores,
Mm.
which means that they have evolved. Like I said, they evolved alongside humans. They have
Right.
evolved to be able to eat some starches,
Mm.
but not to the degree that we are able to process them. So they are carnivores, which means that they derive the majority of their nutrition from
Mm.
animal products.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I look at, I am an advocate for fresh food feeding, for
Mm.
real food feeding. We know that fresh food is better for us than ultra processed food.
Yes.
Things like kibbles are considered ultra processed foods.
Mhm.
And that only really gained popularity post World War II into the
Okay.
60s and 70s. It's a
Mm.
fairly new idea of giving dogs kibble. Prior to that, and I think many people listening might have had, like, their grandparents would be feeding the dogs table scraps, for example.
Right.
They would get the leftover meat or what have you. Like, that's how dogs were fed prior to this movement of
Mm.
creating the kibble. So kibble's a fairly recent thing, but one of the issues that we see in canine nutrition is that kibble is the majority of it, when you're looking at what it's made of, is cereals, grains and cereals.
Mm.
And that's in order to keep the form, the pellet form.
That
So
makes
that's one,
sense.
it's one of the issues with it, is it's majority starchy carbs. The
Mm.
other thing that's an issue is that it has pretty much no moisture in it, zero
Mm.
moisture. And we know that water is the number one nutrient for every living being.
Mm.
And we, just like our dogs,
Yeah.
get most of our moisture, most of our hydration from our food. We don't compensate. Dogs can't compensate by just drinking out of the bowl. They get
Mm.
some hydration from that for sure, but they are designed, and cats even more so, to get their hydration from their food. So this is where fresh food starts to become interesting, where you're looking at feeding real food, real meats, real organ meats,
Right.
non-starchy vegetables, as an example, to create for fiber and phytonutrients to help
Mm.
support the dog's body. But the other thing that I think is really important when we look at what we're feeding our dogs is bioavailability. And this goes to ourselves too.
Yes.
Bioavailability means the form in which the body can get the nutrition out of it.
Mhm.
It's not about just the breakdown of the components, right? It's not about just the chemistry of food, but what
Right.
is the form that the body recognizes as, I'm going to allow this in? Because we have in our gut, I talked about the microbiome being part of
Yes.
this.
Yes.
We have, and our dogs have in our guts, which starts like in the small intestine. We have what are called tight junctions that you've got. When you look at the kind of, we're talking cellular level of the gut,
Yes.
you've got these tight junctions that are like
Okay.
this. And what happens is the body decides, this is like between like the say like the intestine, I'm kind of pointing under my hands here, and then
Okay.
above it being the
Yes.
bloodstream. So it's the
Okay.
body is deciding what is going to be allowed into the bloodstream
Mhm.
once it's broken down, the food. How do we get the nutrients across these junctions into the bloodstream to then go out into the body and nourish the
Right.
body?
Right.
When we have something, people have probably heard of leaky gut syndrome.
Yes. Yes.
What happens with that is that these tight junctions spread apart, and
Mm.
things are just passing through without being like monitored in a
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
What happens with that is you get bits of not fully digested food that's coming
Mhm.
through. This is where we get food intolerances from, is the body recognizes this is a foreign object that shouldn't be in here.
Wow.
So we need to get rid of that. We also have chemical toxins from our foods going through. So going back to even the environmental thing, things like glyphosate that we use as a pesticide,
Mhm.
that coming into our system through
Wow.
these tight junctions that have kind of come apart.
Right.
So we look at what is allowing, what is recognizing that something can come through. We do want things to come through. We just want the junctions to
Right.
be tight, and there to be a kind of policing of sorts of like,
Yes.
let's check, is this the right thing to come across?
Mhm.
Part of how something becomes the right thing to come across is that the body recognizes, okay, we need this. This is in the right form. Let's bring it across and make use of it. A lot of the foods that we are feeding dogs are
Mm.
basically like with a lot of the kibbles, they apply a synthetic vitamin and mineral mix at the end because it goes through a high cooking process. It goes through
Okay.
multiple cookings,
Mm.
forming into the pellets, and then
Mhm.
there are like flavorings that are sprayed onto it to make the dog want to eat it. There are synthetic vitamins and minerals that are added into that. So in
Wow.
terms of bioavailability, those tend to be cheaper forms of minerals, for example, that
Yeah.
the dog's body doesn't even necessarily recognize as something
Right.
that it needs. So just because something goes in the bowl and we can say this is a complete and balanced food for our dogs doesn't mean that it's actually getting absorbed into the body. It's often passing out the other end completely unused.
Mm.
When we talk about fresh foods, this is foods that you and I eat, but they have a slightly different, and I know it's kind of problematic, but I think people are familiar with like the food pyramid, the idea of like
Right.
what are the basics that we need. Their
Yes.
food pyramid looks a little bit different in terms of ratios of things, but it's the
Mm.
same kind of principle as like what do we generally need.
Right.
Fresh foods are what the body recognizes as providing all of those nutrients. So
Mm.
the body is getting more out of the food that we're putting in the bowl when it's fresh. And by fresh, I mean raw or lightly cooked, but the same food that you and I would get at the grocery store. So it was kind of for me that wake up call that I used to imagine going to the grocery store and going down the dog food aisle. And that's where you buy your food for your dogs, and actually realizing my dog food aisle is the butcher's counter, the
Right.
fishmonger's counter, it's the fresh produce section. And that
Right.
when I started paying more attention to that, because like I mentioned, my dog Lucky started with a health condition, so I
Mm.
had to start feeding him differently.
Right.
That started me really looking at, and how am I feeding myself?
Right.
How am I feeding myself on
So
every level?
I learned so much, and nutrition is a passion of mine, you know, so
Mm,
the tight junctures, I don't think I had ever heard of that.
mm.
And, when we talk about microbiome, something I tell everybody I can when we're having conversations about it is about kombucha. Do you drink kombucha?
I do drink kombucha. I
Right,
love
it's
it.
a
Yes.
necessity. I feel like it's a necessity every day. So, water, kombucha. If you guys don't know what kombucha is, it's a fermented tea, right? Made off of a mushroom, a mother mushroom, just like apple cider vinegar is made off of this mother mushroom, right? Organic green and black tea, organic sugar, filtered water. Now it's like all the rave. There's all these different companies that make it, different flavors. My new favorite is peach and pineapple. In
Mm.
college, delicious. I never thought I would see a peach and pineapple kombucha before, but absolutely necessary, right?
Yeah.
And this for me is how I balance the pH level in my gut. And I do this preventatively to keep my system balanced, right? Keep my gut balance, my brain balance, therefore my entire system, prevent disease, right? And balance stress levels, all these things. And what I really like that you added too is that even if the food that you eat is good, let's say the bowl has what you need in it, what about the environment? Those stressors and things like that are going to minimize your absorption of the nutrients. Wow, that makes a lot of
100%.
sense.
100%. Yeah,
Mm.
and again, it's kind of like I think in the West, we tend to have an allopathic approach to our health, which means
Mhm.
that we're looking at symptoms and we're trying to get to the symptoms, right? Like get
Right.
rid of the symptoms.
Mhm.
Again, that getting rid of, we have that
Right.
tendency to want to get rid of.
Yes.
But in reality, every system is functioning as one unit. So one of the things that I find really interesting about the microbiome and the gut, and you'll have to stop me because I could talk
Okay.
about the microbiome all day. Like
We have a
this is a
second. Yeah.
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 It is so fascinating that researchers
Mhm.
often refer to it as like the forgotten organ, that it
Wow.
functions like another organ. And
Mm.
they're starting to see how there is, you might have heard of like the gut brain axis,
Yes.
where we know that 90% of our serotonin, and it's the same for dogs as well, that that's produced in the gut. So the happy hormones are not, it's not about the brain. In part it is, sure, but it's actually really focusing on the gut. And so from a canine
Wow.
perspective, we actually see that dogs who demonstrate things like fear and reactivity and behaviors that we're not exactly happy to have going on, they
Yes.
often have imbalances in their gut microbiome. And so then
Mhm.
feeding that microbiome actually helps to change the brain chemistry. So
Mhm.
we're seeing these direct relationships, but we're seeing that the gut is linked to every single organ. I just
Mm.
did a research paper for one of my nutrition courses on
Yes.
the gut kidney axis, where we're
Okay.
starting to understand that chronic kidney disease has a
Mhm.
direct link with the gut microbiome, again, with dysbiosis, leaky gut. When
Mhm.
we've got those tight junctures that are no longer tight,
Right.
and you've got waste products that are coming out from the intestine into the bloodstream, the kidneys have to filter that out,
Right.
which if you've already got compromised kidneys means that that's putting a greater burden on and can progress the disease more quickly. So there's a lot of research being done in both the human arena as well as in the dog arena around how we can potentially prevent or slow down the progression of chronic kidney disease, not by treating the kidneys, but by treating the gut microbiome and healing up those junctures, balancing out the microbial communities and the diversity of those communities in order to stop the toxins getting out into the bloodstream where the kidneys have to deal with them. So
Mm.
it's obviously, I think it's it's totally fascinating.
I'm
I
with
want
you.
everyone to be.
Yes.
It's so interesting, but looking at these connections and how it isn't just about that idea of like calories in, calories out, like I think a lot of
Right.
us were kind of raised with, but there are all of these other components that affect how we are using our food, how we even think about our food. Like, what if we're putting negative energy, negative thoughts onto our food, is that really going to do a lot of good for our bodies? Probably not.
Right.
Probably not. And so again, it comes back to having that conversation around the relationship between nutrition and nourishment for me.
Mm. I love it. It's so important. And we talked about the gut and the brain connection, right? What I've been using recently outside of kombucha and water, something called Magic Mind, right? And if you guys listen to our last show, we talked about it a little bit. I've really been enjoying it. If you're like me and you like things like we're talking about, intentional ingredients, ingredients that are going to benefit you in a list of different ways, something that's going to improve your energy levels, but it's natural, right? And you can be confident about what you're putting in your body. For me, Magic Mind has been one of those things. And just like expert guest, I'm excited to let you guys know that we have a discount code for you. If you go to www.magicmind.com/WCW, that's magicmind.com/WCW. We have a limited time offer of 56% off of your subscription and then 20% after that. After the first 10 days is going to be 20% off your subscription. So if you're hearing this and you like things like that, make sure that you check out Magic Mind. They have this delicious passion fruit flavor that they put in it to make sure that it really tastes good and all the ingredients go down easily. So I've been enjoying that. Have you ever tried anything like that?
No, what is in it exactly? What are the
Mhm.
active ingredients?
So that's a great question. I would love, do I have it right here? I took it earlier. Let's see if I have it in my recycling. We're talking about environmental wellness, right? What I can do is put it in the show notes. But I was reading it last week. I know it's ashwagandha root, there's mushrooms, there's a list of really incredible ingredients. And
Mm.
I'm definitely that person too. I'll flip it over and read from the top to the bottom to make sure I know what I'm drinking. So I'll share it with you to make sure you have it.
Awesome, awesome.
Mhm.
Well, speaking of mushrooms, medicinal
Yes.
mushrooms like reishi mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, maitake
Yes.
mushrooms, all of that,
Mhm.
those are actually really good for dogs too.
So if somebody wanted to add that to the nutrition and the nourishment for their, well, could you use it interchangeably? I want to make sure I'm using it right. Could you use nutrition and nourishment interchangeably, or would you say nutrition?
Nutrition is more focused on the food itself.
Exactly.
Nourishment is more about the food
Yeah,
in collaboration with everything else. Yeah.
you said that.
Yeah.
Yes. So if somebody wanted to add it to their dog's nutrition, how would they just give them the mushrooms? Would you advise chopping it up and making it with everything? How would you do it?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I wouldn't recommend because I'm not sure what is in Magic Mind. I wouldn't say if you're
Mhm.
using that to put that in your dog's food. Use
Oh,
canine
no.
specific things. Yeah.
Yep, not
Just to
Magic
clarify,
Mind.
case. Yeah.
Thank you so much
Just
for
to
that.
clarify. Yeah.
Right, we're talking
Just to
about the
clarify.
mushrooms for the dogs, yes.
Exactly. So any mushroom that is edible for humans that you would find in your grocery store. So
Mm.
not don't go out foraging looking for something and pick something you don't know what it is. The stuff that's in
No.
the grocery store you can
Yes.
use. You can also purchase powdered, basically dehydrated ones that are or
Yeah.
powdered versions of dehydrated ones
Mm.
online for dogs. So that's an option too. But what I always recommend with anything that we're giving our dogs, that we do it purposefully. So it's for a reason. It's
Mhm.
not just, oh, I heard, I've been guilty of this, and I know other pet parents who have done it too. Like, you hear about the next superfood and you're loading that
Mhm.
into your dog's bowl, or like, oh, I
Right,
heard turmeric is really great for dogs, I'm going to add
right.
some of that in. Oh, blueberries are the best next thing. And then all of a sudden your dog's bowl is full of things that one might not actually be right for your dog. So my whole thing when it comes to fresh food feeding is really about, it's always about feeding the dog in front of you. You
Mhm.
have to look at the dog in front of you. And that's also great why fresh food works so well, is because you can customize. And
Mhm.
so if you want to be feeding mushrooms, it's important to know which mushrooms and what do they do and how
Right.
do they work for your dog. But as a kind of basic way of how you would feed it is either like in a powdered form, or you can like saute them lightly. You want to cook them a little bit lightly, because again, dogs don't break down plant matter in the
Mm.
same way that we do. They don't have the enzymes in their saliva like we do that start breaking down plant matter.
Mm.
When you look at a dog's teeth, by the way, this is like one of the big giveaways of them being carnivorous in nature.
Right, right.
One, their jaws only go up and down. Our jaws go side to side.
Mm.
All animals that can eat a lot of plant matter have jaws that can go side to side and have flat teeth in the back. So if you
Mm.
think of cows, they've got flat teeth in the back. When you look at our molars, they're flat in the back. That's to help break down the cell walls of the plant matter. Dogs, on the other hand, have what we call carnassial teeth, which are those like jagged, like mountainous kind of teeth in the back. They look like shark
Yes.
teeth in the back. That
Right.
is for crunching bone and ripping and shredding meat. They
Mm.
cannot move their jaws back and forth, side to side. They
Right.
can't grind down the plant matter as well as the fact that they don't have amylase, is what it's called, which is the enzyme that breaks down starch matter. They don't have that in their saliva like
Mm.
we do. So you want to help when you're presenting plant matter to dogs. You want to help break it down already for them so that they can get the phytonutrients, the nutrients that are in plants is what phytonutrients
Yes.
into their system. And so you can do that in a couple of ways. And one is either you always want to cook a mushroom, so that's part of how you do it. But also another way you can do it with other things like, say, spinach or pepper, like bell peppers, for example, or fruits, is put it in the food processor and
Mm.
grind it down until it's pureed. And
Okay.
that makes it easier for the dog to get nutrition out of the food.
Mm. Easy, the food pro I love the food processor. You hit
Oh
it,
my
you
God.
zip it a few times, and it's it. And that makes sense. I'm really glad you said that because when I was thinking about what we feed ourselves, what we feed our dogs, I would have just put the kale in the bowl and that been but no, that's not what you need to do. You're not done yet,
Okay.
right?
It's just there's just one little step more. But
Yeah.
something that I found, and this is one of the things that I help pet parents with, is like, how do you actually really simplify this process? Because once you get into it, it's really easy. And when
Mhm.
you go grocery shopping for yourself, you're shopping in the same areas for your dog. So you just pick up a bit extra for your dog,
Right.
and you can feed it raw. Dogs completely can digest raw meat. If you think of wild canines, like they are hunting actual animals out in the wild, they're not cooking them over a campfire kind of thing.
Right.
But you
Right.
can, and some dogs, and I will preface this, that some dogs do better on gently cooked foods. My dog happens to be one of those dogs. So
Lucky.
I do gently cook some of his food. But primarily we're looking at, if you want to know a kind of ratio of what dogs need, it's approximately 70 to 80% muscle meat. And what I mean by muscle meat is like the meat that you would go and get at a grocery store for
Mhm.
yourself. Like
Right.
it's like chicken thighs, chicken breasts,
Mm.
turkey thighs, pork loin,
Mhm.
um, even ground beef, all of that kind of stuff. Like that is the kind of thing we're thinking of muscle meat. Along with the other kinds of muscle meat would be heart meat. That
Mm.
counts as a muscle, but we do a smaller percentage of that. Then we look at having organ meat. And so when I'm meaning about organ meat, or you might hear it referred to as offal, that's like
Mm.
liver, kidney, what we call secreting organs.
Mm.
We do about 10% organ meat. When you're looking at the bowl, if you're imagining it like a pie, approximately
Yes.
10% would be organ meat, 5% of which is generally liver. Liver is like the multivitamin for the dog. It is
Mm.
packed with nutrients. So we make sure that that's always in there. And then we also look at raw meaty bones. So if
Mm.
you've heard dogs can't have bones, I just want to say that it's dogs can't have cooked bones. You
Mm.
never, ever, ever want to feed a cooked bone. Raw bones are actually really good for dogs, and you want to start looking at when if you want help, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to give advice on how to choose an appropriate raw meaty bone for your dog, what that actually looks like, and how you feed it to them. But not only are they getting their calcium and their phosphorus and other important nutrients from the bone, it's
Yes.
also, we talked about, so this is where for me nutrition meets nourishment. Here's a great example.
Mm,
How do we give the dog the opportunity to display behaviors that are so innate to them that when we do that, kicks off this whole chemical symphony for them of like happy hormones, all of that kind of stuff, where they get to really be their truest selves? Chewing raw meaty bones. So that would be like, for example, eating a chicken wing. A smaller dog, like my dog is a Chihuahua, he's a 10-pound dog,
mm,
about
mm,
4.5 kilo dog. So an ideal sized bone for him would be like a chicken wing. And he's got to kind of work at that. It's cleaning his teeth. So we've got dental health strapped into that as well. And
mm.
also where we're talking about all the systems being linked,
Yes.
periodontal disease, we know for both humans and for dogs, is
Mm,
linked to other organ failure diseases. So it's linked to kidney disease, it's linked to heart disease, etc. So keeping the mouth clean so that we don't have bacteria going into the bloodstream and affecting these other organs is a
mm.
primary concern for dogs. And I want to say that the figure is something like 80%. Is a really high, ridiculous figure.
Wow.
80%, and don't quote me on this, it's
I
something
hear
like
you.
this, like
Yes.
80% of dogs 3 years and older have periodontal disease.
Mm,
3 years. Like
wow.
that's a young dog.
Yes, it
So you
is.
then see how disease develops from that. But in
Mm,
eating raw meaty bones, it helps to clean the teeth. But it's been shown that what starts to happen is all those happy hormones are
mm,
released in expectation of eating this bone. As they're pulling, as they're chewing, as they're using those back teeth to kind of grind through everything. And part of what happens is that sends a signal to the stomach to up the gastric acid production, up
mm,
the stomach acid to be able to break that down. That is also really, really helpful for keeping pathogens out,
mm,
killing all of the pathogens. So again, all of these things are kind of connected. But if you've got a stressed out dog or a reactive dog or a dog that's not not really settling well,
yeah.
often giving something like a raw meaty bone, you'll have them napping. My dog is currently doing that on the chair, having had one earlier today. It's so
Mm,
satisfying for them. So for me, that's where like nutrition and nourishment, it's a perfect example of where it comes together. And you can let a dog be a dog in a way
mm,
that's safe and healthy and beneficial for them, but is
mm.
giving them all the nutrition that they need as well.
It's so important. And I have a question for you that I feel like the answer is really easy to, but I don't know what to do. Okay. You
Okay.
say a raw meaty bone. You said a chicken wing, right? So I'm like, I know we're not gonna give Lucky this raw chicken wing and let them chew off the meat and then get the bone. What do you do? Do you literally cut the raw meat and then just the bone? How do you do
No,
it?
I literally give him the wing.
Okay, so a raw wing.
He eats the whole thing,
I guess
the
in
whole
nature
thing.
they are raw, aren't they? Okay.
They are,
Sorry.
yeah.
See,
I know,
yeah.
but this is how we've been so indoctrinated, and trust me, I
Yes.
was there too. I mean, I was like, "What on earth am I gonna do?" And I was so freaked out, which is why I now like to help other pet parents learn how to do it, because I have
Mm,
seen the health benefits that,
mm,
I struggled with. Lucky was showing problems with his kidneys when he was
okay.
really young.
Mm,
And so I had to learn how to modify a diet for him. And he also was having, alongside that,
mm,
really bad stomach issues. And he refused kibble. He just
okay.
stopped eating. So I
Mhm.
had to find some other way to do it. And I was so nervous about, because I'd been sold this idea that
Mm,
dogs need to eat dog food. I'm going to make him malnourished. And there is truth in that. If you're not doing fresh food appropriately,
mhm,
over time you do develop issues. But when you
mhm.
learn how to do it appropriately, and it is
Right.
so easy to do, it's so easy to do. And once you get into the kind of habit of it and you learn, like with anything new, once you kind of learn and you get comfortable, it's like second nature, totally second
Right.
nature. But I have seen the benefits for him. Like he's just completely transformed.
Mm,
And so we work through the fear of how we do it, but you work with somebody that can support you. So and to answer your question about how you give him the chicken wing, when I first
yes.
started with Lucky, I taught him how to eat it. And that will sound kind of weird, but it's like he was sort of like, what do you mean? I've been getting pellets in a bowl. Like what
Yeah.
what is
What is
this thing?
this?
What is this? You know?
Yes.
but I started in a similar way to way I was training him with other things. Like he'd sniff it, and I
Mm.
did like clicker training, or
Okay.
I use which some people will be familiar with from the positive reinforcement world, where you
Yeah.
use like a sound that tells the dog, yes, that's the thing that I'm rewarding you for. But I use the word yes. So he would sniff it. I'd be like, yes. And I'd give him a treat of like some meat. And then he'd sniff it again. I'd say, yes. And give him a treat and get him to learn that I was wanting him to engage with this, and then let him be curious about it. And I always, and I, for myself, and I always advise all pet parents, supervise your dog while you're feeding raw meaty bones. Don't give them a bone and then you leave the house and come
Okay.
back like several hours later. Like, no, you
Mhm.
want to be there, because if they do something, if they do start to choke, because they can choke on a toy, right? They can choke on
Yes.
anything they're putting in their mouths. You just want to be
Right.
there to supervise. So be smart with it, be cautious with it, but recognize that what causes the issue, what we've been told dogs shouldn't have as far as bones, is cooked bones. And raw meaty bones, they can eat it. You
Mm.
can give them some bones that would be like way bigger. So thinking again, Lucky's a small little chihuahua. If I were to
Yes.
give him like a big beef knuckle, I'm not
Mm.
asking him to actually ingest that bone for nutrients. I would give it to him so he can chew against it. He can pull the bits of meat and cartilage and sinew that's on there off. And
Yes.
as he's doing that, he's cleaning his teeth.
This is so
Yeah.
good. This is so good. So we know that you have the Mystic Dog Mama podcast, right? Can you tell
Mhm.
our listeners how they can find you, what they can look forward to, and how to get connected?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you for that opportunity, Shannon.
Of
I
course.
am so excited about Mystic Dog Mama. This is just it, this is like just a love project. It's a passion project of mine. It's so much fun. And
Mm.
like I said, it started with me wanting to create the community that I didn't have. I
Yes.
wanted to start that community and bring some of these conversations together and look at nourishment. So I bring on guests. You can find the podcast anywhere that you stream podcasts. We also have it on YouTube. You just have to Google Mystic Dog Mama. And I bring on experts that talk about everything from health and training and how we're thinking about dogs in general,
Yes.
as well as I do a spotlight series where I bring on other Mystic Dog Mamas to talk about their journeys with their dogs. So it's just a great place for different conversations. I'm also present. It's becoming a really active community, which that's what I really wanted. And so
Beautiful.
I'm present. You can reach me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. Send me a message if you've got a question on how to feed your dog, or you're not quite sure, like, what is this whole raw meaty bone thing? What do I need to
Yeah.
do with that? I'm very active on there. I'm more than happy to answer questions and help support people.
Mm. I don't know why I'm so excited about these raw meaty bones. Like, I think it's I think it's the learning something that I didn't expect that's so simple and right in front of your face and easy to put into action. Like, I love stuff like that. Oh, yep, let me add this to my habits. And
Yeah.
we were talking about exponentiating the growth, the healing, the
Yeah.
possibilities, right?
Totally. And if you're feeding kibble and you want to experiment with adding fresh food to your dog's diet, the simplest way to do that is just start adding what we call toppers, fresh food toppers. So
Okay.
you want to give fresh foods that are dog safe. So I want to clarify, like avoiding onions, avoiding
Mm.
leeks, chives, that kind of a thing. You
Okay.
also want to avoid, like, don't give your dog, you hear about dogs developing pancreatitis around Thanksgiving, and that's
Mm.
because people cook the turkey with the skin on, which is fatty, and the fat seeps into the meat. And then they give the dog the skin, or they give it that meat, and the dog can't process that level of fat. So don't do that. But you can be adding in things like egg, for example. You could do it raw. You could also give a soft boiled egg or a hard boiled egg. You could add in, if you want to add in vegetables, I always suggest non-starchy vegetables.
Mm.
The starch, and what I mean by a starchy vegetable is like a sweet potato or a
Okay.
potato, those kinds of vegetables that dogs, first of all, dogs don't have any dietary requirement for carbohydrates at all.
Mm.
It's not where they get their primary energy from. They first get it from fat, and they secondly get it from protein. So that's where they're deriving their energy. They can process some level of carbohydrates, but like I said, not to the degree that we can. And
Right.
some dogs end up being itchy. They might end up having like diarrhea, loose stools, or
Mm.
vomiting. They might have anal gland issues if they're more sensitive to some of these starchy carbs. So
Yes.
that's something I always say, try to avoid that, especially if you're topping with kibble, because kibble, like I said, is already mostly starch.
Hmm.
So when you're thinking about adding to kibble, add things that it's missing. So you can be adding things like bone broth. Bone broth is such an amazing food for us and for our dogs. It is a
Yes.
gut soother. It feeds the microbiome. It's adding in hydration. That's like my number one thing. Give your dog some
Yes.
bone broth
I
if you're going
love
to
it.
be topping your kibble. And meats.
Microbiome. I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes. I just made some bone broth last week. So,
Ah, I love it.
yes, bone broth is important. It's
It's
important.
so important.
Okay, this is beautiful. Thank you so much for all the
Thank you.
details, and I love it. I think the do what do we call it? The dog mamas are gonna be really happy. And do you say dog papas? Are they the dog
Yes,
papas?
I do.
Yes?
There are dog papas too, and I invite dog papas. There's no exclusion there. It's always for dog
Right.
mamas and dog papas.
I love it. So before we go, Dr. Miller, every week we do a wisdom in action, something that we as experts and hosts, business owners, right, are doing for ourselves in this dimension of wellness to maintain our own wellness. So for environmental wellness, what are you doing for your wisdom in action this week?
Oh, I love this question so much.
Thank
And
you.
this might actually surprise people given that I've just been talking about being like a dog mama, and
Okay.
I take my dog out for walks and I do all that.
Yeah.
But I have also recognized where I have not been as conscious or proactive with my own need to get out in nature without my dog,
Mm-hmm.
without him, because he, like I said, he's a reactive dog. We've got some issues from him being a pandemic pup, and so when I'm out walking him, I'm very much conscious about him. And I have made the conscious effort now of nourishing myself by going out for walks in nature without him and without guilt, and seeing how I experience my environment in a different way when I've not got like one eye on him at all times. So we often in the kind of dog world talk about, there's like this bragging of like, my dog does eats better than I do and my dog gets all of these things and that's so great. And it's I actually would like to counter that, which you should be getting that too. You should be eating as well too. You should be going out for your walks or whatever nourishes you too. And I have been consciously putting that into action for myself. So that's how I'm putting wisdom in action.
I love it. I support you in that.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes. And I'm glad you said that because when we talk about activity, getting out with the dog is something that I've thought about suggesting to people so that they get out. But you might end up, if you were not walking, only walking with your dog. And then we end up in the same type of situation with caring
Yeah.
for somebody else or something else that you love, right? And you were still not considered as much as possible.
Absolutely. And like we said, like earlier on in this chat, like it all starts with self-love and self-trust. If you
Yes.
want to care for your dog, you got to love yourself. You got to care for yourself first and foremost.
Yes, yes, and that's what I was gonna say is doing it first, right? If you're about to feed the dog, maybe feed yourself first, you know? That's how I try to stack it. Um, let's see what my wisdom in action is along the line of yours. Where did I write it? Do I wanna do the same one? Because it was
You
nourishment. That's
total.
what I have wrote it down. I think I am.
All right. We should go for a walk
Yes.
together. That would be
Yes,
fun.
that would be fun. That would be a lot of fun, and it's been beautiful outside, so time outside has been something I've been thinking about, sunlight, being intentional about it, and not just working throughout the day, you know, because I try to be active during the business hours, but you have to nourish yourself too, so hashtag nourishing myself.
Oh, I love that. I
I
love
love
it.
it.
Take
Well,
it and
thank
run with it, my friend.
yes, yes, and we are running, so I will think about you next time I'm running. I said, "I'm taking it with me and I'm running with it." That'd be funny. Maybe I do a little nourishing myself piece of paper, like run with it really, literally.
I love it. I love it. Get
Um,
on a t-shirt. Put it on your
mm,
t-shirt.
and we talk about merch. I'm gonna make a note. Christine, you hear this? This is a good idea. Okay, let's see, t-shirt. So before we go, Dr. Miller, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners, our viewers, before you leave?
I think we've talked a lot about nutrition and nourishment, and I also want to add in there the importance of play. And that's
Mhm.
something that dogs give us permission to do and invite us
Yes,
to do. And I think so often we overlook it. So I would just invite everyone to go and play with your dog. Just
yes.
enjoy your dog, enjoy being with your dog and being silly and getting on the ground and all those things. Like that's just as important to
Mm.
nourishment as the food that you're putting in the bowl.
I love it. And I lied. I do have one more question for you. We talked about the dogs, right? We talked about the doggies. What about the cats and the intentional nutrition for them?
So cats are what we called obligate carnivores. And I should say, I don't I'm not a cat nutritionist, so I
Okay.
can't specifically advise on how to feed a cat at this time.
Okay.
But I can tell you that they're obligate carnivores, which means that unlike dogs, we said that they're facultative carnivores, where they can
Yes.
eat some starchy meat and thrive, or not starchy meat, starchy vegetables and
Vegetables.
thrive.
Yes.
Cats cannot. They
Mm,
can't. They get all of their nutrition from animal sources.
okay.
And they also struggle with getting their hydration from the water in their bowl even more than dogs do. So they're really a reliant. They do so well on fresh food diets because they are getting all of the nourishment that they need, but they're also getting all of the hydration that they need. Cats can be a little bit funny though when it comes to changing what they're eating. They can be harder to transition to a fresh food because they
Mhm.
get so used to and arguably kind of addicted to the kibble or the canned food that they're on. So they can be a little bit testy. It can take a little bit of time to kind of get them over onto the fresh thing, but it's
Okay.
totally possible. And I would encourage anyone with a cat just to kind of look around at raw and fresh feeding and see how you can be supporting your cat in a similar way to what I've described with dogs. But again, it's going to be more focused on specifically animal products and not adding in veggies so much.
I love it. And I've been hearing a lot about ultra processed stuff. And when we got to ultra processed, over processed, clearly I'm late, but I'm glad that I've been intentional about the fresh foods and that's the train I ride. That's where I live. So I'm super grateful for this conversation. Thank
Me
you
too,
so much.
Shannon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Yes. Peace. Okay, guys. Wow. What a good show on environmental wellness. Again, if you're here at the end, we're talking about nourishing your dog, yourself, mind, body, and soul, and how all these things work together, right? If you were here when we were talking about Magic Mind, I do want to make sure that I give you guys this discount code so that you can get everything we were talking about. That's going to be WCW20. And with everything else, Women Connected in Wisdom, stay connected to our social media, get connected to the LinkedIn community to be part of the wider conversation. And thank you so much for listening to episode 163. I'll see you live next week for season 19 wrap. Hopefully, me and Christine, me and guests, we'll see what happens. In the meantime, be well, be wise, be whole. We'll see you soon. Peace.